prophet Isaiah was the greatest of the writing prophets. He received so many prophecies about the coming of the Christ that some people even call his writings the gospel of the Old Testament. While it is true that Isaiah wrote extensively about the first coming of the Messiah, he also wrote more than 3 times as much about the second coming. Isaiah even saw the 2 comings of the Lord and indicated that the Lord would be returning to Jerusalem. This presentation is Isaiah's perspective about where the Antichrist will come from. In Isaiah's prophecies regarding the time of the end and the coming kingdom of God, he also wrote about the final world leader who he called the Assyrian and the king of Assyria. In this presentation, I am going to touch on just a few of Isaiah's prophecies regarding this final world leader we call the Antichrist. We will be examining Isaiah's prophecies to determine where God was pointing and when this world leader would come against Israel. As we consider Isaiah's prophecies about the final world leader called the Antichrist and where he will be from and when he will come against Israel, we should also be aware that when the Lord sets up his kingdom on earth, this is called the day of the Lord, and it's often referred to by the prophets as that day or the day. Now let's see what Isaiah says. When the Lord has finished all his work against Mount Zion and Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the king of Assyria for the willful pride of his heart. In that day, the remnant of Israel, the survivors, will no longer rely on him who struck them down, but will truly rely on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. Remember, if you will, that at first Israel will rely on the Antichrist when he confirms a covenant with them. But then, in the middle of that covenant, he will set himself up as God and start the Great Tribulation and persecute Israel. So Isaiah describes this final world leader as the Assyrian. He's the king of the Assyrian Empire. And here's a picture of the Assyrian Empire. And he says that first, Israel will rely on this one who beats them with a club, but the Antichrist first confirms a covenant with them, and then he sets himself up as God in the temple of God, and then he starts the Great Tribulation, and that lasts 3.5 years until the Lord comes and delivers Israel. The Lord Almighty says, O my people who live in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrians, who beat you with the rod and lift up a club against you as Egypt did. Very soon my anger against you will end, and my wrath will be directed to their destruction. The Lord Almighty will lash them with the whip in that day. Their burden will be lifted from your shoulders, and their yoke from your neck. Lebanon will fall before the Mighty One. So God says at first he will be angry with Israel, and he will allow the Assyrian to punish Israel. But then he says his anger with them will cease, and it will be turned to wrath, and his wrath will be turned toward the Assyrian and the Assyrians, and it will cause their destruction. This is when God actively returns and gets involved in the affairs of men and for the protection and the deliverance of Israel. Isaiah describes where and when. Recorded in Isaiah 14, the Lord Almighty has sworn, as surely as I have planned, so it will be. I will crush the Assyrian in my land on my mountains. I will trample him down, and his yoke will be taken from my people, and his burden removed from their shoulders. This is the plan determined for the whole world. This is the hand stretched out over all the nations. This battle that is being described here is going to be in the land and on the mountains of Israel. And this is the plan determined for the whole world. This is the final battle on the great day of the Lord. And we see that the Antichrist is the Assyrian. And we're seeing where the Assyrians were. Where was Isaiah pointing? From my other presentations and other biblical descriptions, we also know that the Antichrist will arise out of a 10-nation kingdom. The Assyrian Empire that Isaiah saw will be probably encompassing many of the nations you see here on this map. But keep in mind, God says that these Assyrians and the Assyrian ruler, the king of Assyria, the Antichrist, will come against Israel first, and then God will intervene and deliver Israel and usher in his kingdom. As we've seen from Isaiah, where the Antichrist comes from, the area of the Assyrian Empire, this will be the future kingdom of the Antichrist. And when he comes against Israel will be at the end of the age, when the day of the Lord is at hand, and the Lord once again intervenes in human affairs, returns to Zion to deliver Zion and God's people from the clutches of the Antichrist.